We live in an age of open plan offices and breakout groups. But creativity has never really been a corporate, collaborative affair. In fact, it's most often in solitude that real creative breakthroughs happen. So question, what do the theory of gravity, King Lear, and our words for quantity, quality, and essence all have in common? Answer, they were all isolation projects. At home in 1665, the year Defoe's Journal of a Plague Year takes place, Isaac Newton built bookshelves and made a small office, filling a blank notebook with his ideas and calculations. He didn't have the distractions of his teachers or fellow students from Cambridge, from where he'd been sent home during a plague year. And his biographers call it his year of wonders. In that year, sitting at home, just like you, Newton developed the entire maths of integration and differentiation, his theories of gravity, the force that ties the whole universe together, and, shut in his room, he made light pass through two prisms in a row, showing that white light contained the entire colour spectrum. It was the most productive period of his life. 6 months after his return, he was already a minor fellow of Trinity College, and 2 years later, Lucasian professor. But he spent the rest of his career working out the insights that he'd had cooped up at home during the plague. Now, we don't know much about Shakespeare's life, but we do know Lear is first performed before James VI and first on Boxing Day 1606. And we know theatres were closed that summer due to the plague. It's tempting to read Shakespeare's bleak, death-ridden play as a plague text. We do also know Shakespeare's most productive years, between 1603 and 1613, coincide with a period when the Globe and all other theatres were shut more than 60% of the time. So, when business stops, sometimes it's creativity that flourishes. Let's look again at the relationship between those two things, business and leisure. Let's go back to classical Rome, where daily business was negotium. We still use the word, especially in Spanish or in Italian, to negotiate. But negotium comes from the negation of something else, which is otium. Otium is leisure. Necotium is the negation of leisure. It's business and figuratively difficulty, pains, trouble. So what then is otium? It's time free from activity. It's peace and quiet. And Cicero uses that word over and over to describe the freedom he has sitting in his Tuscan farmhouse to write and study. For him, like many of us, this freedom was initially completely unwarranted and wanted. Claudius caused the Senate to exile Cicero in 58 BC, denying him fire and water within 400 miles of Rome. He championed republican government by the Senate, and for this he was exiled, and eventually his head and hands severed and displayed by Mark Antony, who, though he wasn't the first emperor of Rome, did attempt to style himself that way and like to see himself that way. We see this particularly on coins. So, after his first exile, Cicero in 58, he takes up voluminous correspondence with friends like Atticus, and he introduces to European culture the art of refined letter writing. He takes Latin, which he finds as a modest utilitarian language, and in his farmhouse he turns it into a versatile literary tongue that can express abstract thoughts with clarity. It was unwanted isolation, but he gives us the words essentia, humanitas, qualitas, and quantitas. And what did Mark Antony give us, really, apart from a character in a sort of minor Shakespeare play? Some artists have sought out willingly this purifying intensity of isolation. Mahler sequestered himself for 3 summers in his Komponierhäuschen, his composition hut, furnished only with table, chair, stove, and piano. Here, in seclusion, he completed both his 2nd and 3rd symphony. A little bit closer to home, The 20th century English painter Derek Hill had a painting hut on Tory Island in Donegal. He took breaks to teach the local fishermen to paint. Dylan Thomas had a writing shed overlooking the River Tough in Carmarthenshire. Wittgenstein had one in Norway, in Skjolden. There he came up with most of the ideas in his Tractatus, and learned Norwegian to talk to villagers, and Danish so he could read Kierkegaard. George Bernard Shaw had a rotating writing hut which he could shift to catch the sunlight. In it, he resolved to write at least 5 pages a day, regardless of whatever else was going on. Even David Cameron built a writing shed in his garden in Witney. So there's clearly something about isolation, even unwanted solitude, maybe especially undesired retreat, that can spark creation. And we take what we've observed in the world and stored in our memory chips, and we put it through our processor. For my brother, this is his chance to take up pastels and relearn art. For me, there's been some neglected academic writing, long on the back hob, that I now have time for. What will be your isolation project?